Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Wow, that was a.
I told you. I said, tell me when you're ready.
Woo! Well, happy Muse Day, all. That was quick. Happy Muse Day, Dan. I want to get going on today because I feel like Sunday was very thick, but I also want to respect that Dan's got some preparations to do for this weekend, and we don't have time to be dilly-dallying, Dan.
That's right. However, I do have to say, it's October, and it's the Halloween season, and there is a terrifying figure behind your head. And
yeah,
does he have a head?
Yeah. Let me just.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. It's, in case anyone tries any shenanigans, Gus has my back there.
Gus, yeah. You also have the little witch over there too. So
yeah. All of those are the Wizard of Oz Funko
And you have a skull. I mean, I didn't know. I'm just starting to realize how dark you are. Oh my goodness.
Spooky season, man. Spooky season.
Wow.
Okay, I can show you something lighthearted that I'm very excited about. I'm just going to show you. Greg was talking about 1/3. This is 1/4. And just tell me when you can see it.
Oh, yeah, I can see. Oh, no, then I started talking. You got to talk so that the camera will switch.
Okay. Yeah, can you see that? That is Rose. That's one of my ladies. That's one of the Golden Girls.
Wow, cool. Now you're assuming you're going to get the other 3.
Oh, I have the other 3.
Oh, you do?
I'm just showing you. Oh, I'll show you my set because Rose is my favorite, and then Sophia is my second favorite. So it's like they're all in Versace sunglasses and jogging suits. So see, that balances out. The whimsy balances out the spooky. Yes. So there you go.
Well, that's pretty cool. Now, are you going to have those in your office, or where do you put those?
Yes, they're going to go. Can you see that wall right back there? They're going to go kind of like Columbo overlooks you and supports you. Columbo has your back. The ladies will have my back, besides Gus in this skull.
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right. Well, Dan, we're getting right down to business. I'm telling you.
Yes, we are.
The Ancient Serpent let's blame Greg because Sunday, the Ancient Serpent, talking about the abyss, kind of hinting at the dragon a little bit. So spooky was already in the air and I just leaned into it. So that's what that is. All I'm going to say before you start your summary is that you must know how beloved you are, because people in the chat on Sunday were like, oh, Dan, praying for you. I don't know how you're going to do this summary. Oh, my goodness. You've got your work cut out for you. So, man. I have all the confidence in the world, but that was really sweet. I thought that people
yes. Yeah. It feels good to be understood and empathized with. And I have to say, too, that's a good point you raise about just the nature of these sermons, because it is getting close to Halloween, and these sermons, this part of the book has all sorts of Halloween-esque creatures, and we've got dragons and monsters and beasts with eyes all over, and it's a good time for us to be going through this. I didn't even think of that. That's a good point. But yes,
dots, Dan.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah, we have to work together on that, and I appreciate all of that. So the Ancient Serpent, we're in this series called The Wrath of the Lamb, and Greg is kind of still laying some foundational stuff as we go forward through chapter 6 of Revelation. And so he's been talking about Satan, and really more than just Satan, he's really kind of getting at who's in charge or who's responsible for the evil and suffering that we see in the world, and is God pulling the strings on all of that? So who's behind all of the violence, not only of the world, but all of the symbolic violence in the book of Revelation. And so now what Greg argues is that who's really behind it is Satan. And but it's interesting because it's not explicit yet. It gets explicit in chapter 12. That's where we get this full unveiling that Satan is this this kind of force, this agent behind all of these things. And so before that, you just get these hints that that's going to happen. And so so a couple preliminary points that Greg just shares to kind of get at this is that it's hard right away, right off the bat, because, in the West, especially, we don't really make a lot of conceptual space in our lives for a Satan figure. That's in fact, if we have any room in there, it's usually filled with mockery of this whole idea. And Greg and myself and most of us on the staff here think that that's a mistake. I think that we should be taking this Satan figure seriously. This idea of this transcendent evil intelligence, and I'll come back to that maybe after the summary. But so that's the first thing. The second thing is once you at least if you're open to the idea of this evil intelligence, now you can see how John uses that within Revelation, and Revelation sort of unfolds like a symphony. And I really like that analogy that Greg uses, because especially like if you listen to Chopin's Opus 23. You can hear like this melody and just like these fragments of the melody, and it's, oh, that's cool. Oh, where did it go? And it's gone. And then it comes back a little bit. It's like, oh, I like that. Come back, bring that back. Oh, shoot. And then about 4 minutes into the opus, boom, he hits you with the full melody, and it's so cathartic. And part of the reason why it feels so good is because there are these little teases of it, and then all of a sudden, boom. And then, of course, what's cool about Opus 23 is that he comes back to it again, and you think that it's going to have that same climax, and then it all falls apart, and it's so glorious. But this is not a summary of Chopin. This is a summary of Greg's sermon, but the point is still the same. What John is doing is he's giving you these little teases of this agent behind evil, and then boom, he hits you with the full unveiling of this creature in chapter 12. And so Greg then in this sermon wants to show 4 places where John sort of leaves a hint of that dark melody leading up to chapter 12. And so the first place we find that in is in the 7 churches, where Satan is mentioned 3 times, and 2 of those 3 times it's in reference to the fact that this being or this agent is trying to deceive the church, and so do not be deceived. That's the first kind of hint of that melody. The second hint of the melody is in the throne room, and what we find there is we find this sealed scroll. And first of all, you have to ask, well, why is it sealed? Because, and Greg mentions this, he talks about how throughout the Revelation, there is just this openness on the part of God, where we're actually invited into the throne room, and we're seeing the inner workings of everything. But then for some reason, this scroll is sealed. And Greg doesn't say this, but the first thing I would say is that it's being hidden from somebody, namely an adversary. That's why it has to be sealed. But the point that Greg makes out of that is the question is who is worthy to open this scroll? And this goes back to Genesis 3, where the serpent is basically trying to argue with Eve that God is not worthy. God is not worthy, and only Satan is the worthy one, and so forth. And so you see those echoes of Genesis 3 in the text here in the throne room. The third spot where we see the hint of this melody that'll come to full fruition in chapter 12 is in chapters 8 and 9. There are 14 mentions of 1/3. And this is a bizarre sort of thing. And I'd never heard this until reading these books and listening to Greg. But what Greg argues is that when you see these mentions of 1/3, it's always some type of destructive, violent thing that's going on, where 1/3 of the stars are cast down, or 1/3 of the people are, killed. And what Greg and Tongstad argue is that 1/3 is an indicator. It's like a signature of Satan. And Satan is the 1/3. Satan is the one who is trying to ascend, who is incomplete. Satan is the one who wants to be fuller, wants to be whole, and there is this inherent incompleteness to Satan, and so that this language of 1/3 is used as an indicator of this is something that Satan is doing here. And so it's basically a way of knowing when you see the 1/3, we know that that's Satan's signature. So this is something that Satan is doing, not God. And you see that even before chapter 12. And then the fourth place is that John uses these names to kind of refer to this agent beforehand. And so in Revelation 8, 10, and 11, he refers back to the star that fell from the sky, which we find back in Isaiah 14. And then that's called wormwood, is this star. And then in chapter 9, John talks about this angel of the abyss, and that also refers to this Satan figure. And so those are these four places before chapter 12 where you see this is actually the Satan figure before he's fully unveiled, before the melody is fully played out. There are these little hints of it leading up to it. And then he just closes the sermon by saying, remember, especially if you accept this idea of this evil intelligence, that means that we are in a war zone, and it's so easy to forget that. In fact, one of the tactics of the enemy is to get us into a vacation mindset instead of a warfare mindset. And so we have to be diligent about keeping our focus correct, which is not to say we can never take vacations or anything like that. It's a mindset in life that we have to continually protect and foster. And then he just has 3 practices that he recommends to kind of push back against the deception of this evil intelligence. And the first one is to question truth always. And so every ad you see, every meme you see, every YouTube video you watch, just continually ask, is this true? First of all, what's important to the person or the people who are presenting this, and do I agree with those values? And just question everything like that. The second point is to know the truth, and then the third point is to live the truth. And so know the truth that is revealed in Christ, and then to live out the truth as we are commanded to live. That is to and the example that Greg gives is to commit to always telling the truth and speaking truthfully and speaking straight. That is my summary for the Ancient Serpent. And what did you think of Greg's sermon?
Good job, Dan. Well, we're fully transparent here on the MuseCast. And so I'm going to say in full transparency, the first time I heard it, I was so confused because we've talked about this before, how a lot of times on Sunday, I have to passively listen because of other things that I'm doing. And so I would just kind of I would kind of be coming in and out of, let's just say if you're thinking of like a musical piece, I was just coming in and out of it and just hearing little blurps. And so every time I would hear a blurp, I was like, I'm sorry, what? And so thankfully I have since listened a couple of more times, but there was someone who was at the service who afterwards, he just comes up and he's like, hey, can you ask, or do you know what Greg meant by the intelligence of Satan, blah, blah, blah. And because I hadn't fully listened, I was like, what even are you talking about, dude? So anyway, It all makes sense once you re-listen, but I will say that again, this is a sermon that I do feel like you need to intentionally and mindfully listen and take notes. And there are some sermons, yes, even sermons that Greg gives that can be more like devotional in nature, just like more like you get inspired, or whatever, or you're challenged or whatever. But this, and he said, is more like a lecture in many ways. And I really believe that like the symphony that the allegory that he used there, the metaphor that he used, whatever, you need to have heard what happened last week. I think that's important, and to fully comprehend what he's talking about this week, because what he is doing is he's setting the stage. He's laying the foundation for what's to come. And it's very important to have this foundation laid so that we can properly understand and interpret what's to come. Because what has happened for the last however many years is people have read things in Revelation and assumed something that's just, we don't think is the case. And so Greg is really he's Columboing it. He's just like, methodically laying out the case for what is to come. And so that's a lot of what we saw here again. And I really appreciate that once I was able to sit down and fully listen and take notes. I think it's important to to lay these foundational things and to see how these things do circle back, which shouldn't be a surprise to us, but sometimes I still am a little surprised, like, oh, wait, that's, way back there. So I really appreciated that. I loved how, again, we circled back to one of the letters to Woodland Hills about the spiritual battle that we're in, and to not sleep on that. The vacation mindset, like you were just talking about. I just thought that was really good. And I do think my favorite part, if you can have a favorite part, but the thing that has resonated most with me, and the thing that I am been praying through, is the bit about the signature. Because the ramifications of that are just really fascinating to me. And I was not an art history major. I am not gifted in that way. I appreciate the beauty of art, but there are people who can look at a portrait, like a classic portrait painting, and because of certain things that they see, certain strokes that they used or color palettes that they use, they can identify who the artist is without, there being that little sign saying, this is a blah, blah, blah. Like they can see it because of the signature of the artist. And by signature, I don't mean like literal, like Dan Kent does on his books, but no, like because of the technique, because of the things that they do and use, it's like, oh, this artist is known for this. And so for me, that was a really cool way to like identify who's really at play here, who's responsible for this that we're seeing. And so that was something that really, really stood out to me. And again, just like picking up on the clues of what is about to be revealed. And I think if we get that, it will help us so much as we continue to move through the book of Revelation. And I know for people it's a reframe, because it's been so popular that Jesus has come in, to kick tail and take names and all of that stuff. But it's really good. And the final thing I will say is I always, like whenever Greg talks about the enemy, Satan, the serpent, like it doesn't even like register for me, because my entire Christian walk, I've been taught about the enemy, and I've been taught about a battle that we're in spiritually. And so that is just something I'm used to hearing. I forget that there are many who are just like, they more think it's just a caricature and, like Greg was talking about. So yeah, that's just a fascinating little tidbit that like, I don't even like bat an eye at that, because that's just something I've always believed or known. So yeah, I just think that just a little point of interest.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I think I'm the opposite, because I kind of came to faith in my late teens, and it wasn't because of Satan. It was, I had no interest in any of that stuff. I was just very compelled by the resurrection and the whole narrative of the creator and all of that. And then, going into college, Satan was sort of like this, he's something you don't talk about that. And, amongst intellectuals, so I definitely had this sense of feeling like, that's not cool to talk about that, and I had to get past that ego stuff before I could say, I'm sorry, but this seems like it's true. And so I have had to come from that other direction.
Right.
So
yeah, this was just a good reminder of that, because like you said, like there are certain things that you just accept because that's just how you've thought. And then there are other things that challenge how you've thought, and how you handle that is, I think, very telling. So Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of.
The other thing you said, which I thought was great too, is just that the idea of the signature just being not necessarily the name at the bottom of the canvas, but the actual way the art is performed. And really, when you think of it that way, what John is doing with this idea of a signature is no different than what Jesus had already kind of set us up for, where he says that, look, the thief, the Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's his signature. And that's how you can tell his work. Does it do one of these things? And we know that God doesn't do one of these things because Jesus also says a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And so if God was doing the stuff that Satan is doing, well, then he is divided against himself, and it doesn't make any sense. And so I thought that was a really good way of laying that out. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I kind of like to think of it, and I think we're going to get into some of that Satan intelligence stuff here in a moment. But another way I like to think of it, again, just because of the way my brain works, is like the enemy is just like the great identity thief, right? Because like, especially in our world today, we're always hearing about identity theft and how the ways you can guard yourself from identity theft. And I feel like the great deception is that he has been so effective as portraying himself as being unresponsible for things that he's actually been responsible for. He's like, wasn't me, but he was totally doing all the things and then tagging God with the results of that death and destruction and division and everything. And so in my life, in my leadership in the church, in my roles, I think that's what I've come up against the most with people, is them just attributing to God things that God had nothing to do with, that it was actually the enemy, because he is the great identity thief. Like he's always doing things, and it's a great deception. And great, I mean big, not awesome.
Right.
All right. Did you want to?
No, I think the identity. Well, I will say this. In 1999, I was sitting at a park, and I'm not going to share it. I don't even know if I even have it anymore. But I did write a poem about the moon being like a Satan figure, because it shines light at night in the darkness, except it's not the moon's light. It's just reflecting off of the sun. And so that just reminded me of that, that kind of identity theft. And that's exactly what we see with Satan, is he can't really do anything or create anything on his own. He can only destroy what's already there. And that's sort of the hallmark, the signature of the evil one. So
yeah, absolutely. I, side note, feel like we may need to, in the future, have a segment of Dan shares his creativity, because you have haikus, poems, books, yoga poses. You have things to share with the people, Dan. And remember, these are premium subscribers, so I feel like they should be able to get in on some of that. Okay. We have a question sent in regarding the 1/3, and we have a question sent in regarding Satan, basically. So, and the violence there. So do you want to go, which one, where do you want to go first?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Either one.
All right. Let's do the 1/3, because it's kind of like we've been talking about the signature and everything. And I'm just really fascinated by that. And thank you, Mr. T, for sending in this question. Pity the fool. All right, Shawna and Dan. Greg's interpretations, is Greg's interpretation similar to other nonviolent voices in church tradition before and after Constantine? And can you expand / clarify on the 1/3 versus 3 symbolism?
Yeah. I can't answer with any specificity on the pre-Augustinian view of interpreting Revelation. I just don't have that knowledge base, so I can't really speak to that, unfortunately. I will expand on the 1/3 though just a little bit, and I think that the way that you laid it out is really good too, about just you can tell the signature just in the type of stuff that the type of stuff that's going on. The 1/3 is sort of a way of mocking Satan and saying, and just making it explicit that this is the same being that does the 1/3 here is the same one who does the 1/3 there. And it's just a way of tying it all back to Satan. And that happens a lot where these numbers can take on a significance of their own. Like in basketball, for instance, you know, if you shoot in professional basketball, you shoot a shot, and you get fouled, and then the ball still goes in, so you get to 2 points, then you get a chance at a free throw to add a point. Now, that whole thing of shooting, making the basket, getting fouled, that's a lot of words there. And so that has been succinctly referred to as an and one. And so when you say and one, everybody knows it means this whole thing. And so it kind of has taken on a signature of its own. Another popular one in certain subcultures is 420. That is a number that has taken on. I mean, I have
What is
no
that,
idea.
Dan?
I have no idea. No, I have no idea what it means, but it's a number it means something to certain. And so that's what's going on here with Satan, and the 1/3 is sort of like, aha, it's the 1/3 guy. It's the one who's trying to ascend. It's the one who's full of himself yet empty at the same time. That's who that is. And so I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah, that was a great way to put it.
Hey, I got basketball and drug culture all in the same thing. So
listen, don't say that we're not for every man, woman out there, because
right.
You had me with the and one. It's so funny too, because if you watch sports games, like players know, you'll hear, they'll be like, and one, like after they get fouled or whatever, because they know what's coming. Yeah, I think the 1/3, the only thing I would add is like, he's it's like the imitator, but never could duplicate, because God is 3 in 1. We've talked about that, Father, Son, Spirit, and he just so badly wants to be a part of it. He just so badly is like, he's upset that he got kicked out of the group, and he just so badly wants to be a part of it. And so anytime you see that 1/3, that's like referencing the enemy and not the 3 in 1, not the triune God. And I will say, I too don't have knowledge about prior to Constantine, but I do know, I mean, I know that things that we have studied has shown that the church as a whole used to espouse a very strong belief in nonviolence. And I also know that Greg isn't the only theologian today that holds these nonviolent views and interprets things through that lens.
Yeah.
That's all to that situation. All right. Good questions today, you guys. Thank you for sending them in. We've got another Mr. T, and he wants a little bit of Isaiah 14 that I referenced. So in his sermon, and going back and kind of laying some stuff out. He says, does Isaiah 14 show God violently defending the realm of heaven against Satan? Question we get quite a bit, actually. John 18 seems to depict Jesus approving of violent self-defense, saying that if his kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. So did Jesus fight against Satan in Isaiah 14? Perhaps I totally misunderstood what Greg was saying about violence and fighting. Please help.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think, first of all, the John 18 one, I think what's being said there is the exact opposite of that. I think what Jesus is saying is that if I were not me, then I would be for violence. But since I'm me, I'm absolutely against violence. What he's saying is that if I were like everybody else, that is, if I were of this world, then I would do what the people in this world do, which is to fight with violence. But the implication there is that I'm not of this world, therefore I'm not about violence. And so Jesus is making the opposite statement than what this questioner brought up. So that would be a straight out no. The Isaiah part is a little foggier, but when I look at Isaiah 14, I see that, like for instance, in 12, it says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. And so now it doesn't say who did the casting here, and it doesn't say that whether or not it was because it says in the first part it says how you have fallen from heaven. So there's no third party involved in doing that for sure, because that's just a very passive construction. Um, and then when you have been cast down, there's a lot of stuff that can be a self-imposed cast down on its own. Like if I were to read like 12, you have been cast down to earth, I would probably like if this was the only verse that we had of the Bible, I would say I could see where that would be God casting Satan down. But certainly when you look at the scripture as a whole and you start to piece together the nature of God and what God is like and so forth, especially as we go into these next few sermons here, we're going to start talking about the nature of God's judgment and how, and Greg even talked about it this week, how evil kind of collapses in on itself. And that's how I would bring all of that to this and say, well, you have fallen from heaven. That is, your schemes have collapsed in on themselves, is how I would read that. Because he goes on, he says, look, you said, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly. These are very grandiose aspirations that this character has, and it didn't work out. It collapsed in on itself. He fell. Instead of ascending to the stars, it failed, it backfired, and he fell. We don't get the details of the nature of the fall. We don't get the details of the nature of the failure. We just know that these are grandiose expectations. It didn't work and it collapsed in on itself. And so when it says you have been cast down to earth, I think that's another way of saying in a with a better verbiage, like an actual verb, not just words. The verb there is better. It's more dramatic to say, not only did it collapse, but your failure cast yourself down to earth. And that's how thoroughly failed you were, is that it just, you didn't just like stumble, you smashed down to earth. And so that's how I would read it. But it's a good question. And it's one of those questions where it makes me want to hone my Isaiah knowledge more, especially as we're going through Revelation, because so much of Revelation points back to Isaiah and Ezekiel and really all of the prophets in the Old Testament. So, good question.
Great question. Thank you for sending that in. And thank you, Dan, for responding to it. Yeah, I will say that we've all kind of shared, those of us that are a part of the teaching in the series have all kind of shared our initial reluctance to get into Revelation. It's a book that many of us have avoided, haven't really wanted to dive into. And now I have another bone to pick with Revelation, because it is forcing me to look back at some Old Testament things that in many ways I would love to just avoid altogether, but I think it's helpful and important. So Revelation is for sure reading me as I'm reading it, like Greg likes to put it.
Yeah.
If you guys have questions, comments, please send them in, because this is how the MuseCast is here to kind of just further dig at some of this stuff. And we know that upon hearing something, even if you take copious notes and everything, like the processing of it together, the learning together is really what helps to solidify that. And so, yeah, that's just a little PSA for your continued engagement with the MuseCast and the other ways in which we support the sermons. Dan, do you know what time it is?
I think according to my clock, it's Nugget Time. Woo!
Nugget Time. According to your clock, that is right. 2 times a day for sure. Are you feeling like you want to start Nugget Time?
I'll go first.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I'll go first.
All right.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is that, there's a lot of information in last week and this week. And I guess what I would just reiterate, and Greg kind of pointed at this too, but I would just say that part of the reason why this stuff is so important is that it's important to know who's responsible for the evil and suffering in the world. And now, ultimately, God is sovereign, and God is here to ensure that everything works out in a godly way for for His people and so forth. But that doesn't mean that He's responsible for every evil thing that happens. And part of the reason why I think that's important is that it's really hard to trust a God if his goodness is not trustworthy. And if he tells us not to kill, if he tells us that murdering is wrong, and yet then he goes and kills a bunch of people and slaughters a bunch of people, it's really hard for me to give my allegiance fully to that God. I might go through the motions of giving allegiance just out of lack of better options, just out of fear of damnation, just out of all sorts of things. But it's not the robust love that God is calling us to. It's not the profound covenant that God wants from us. And in order to have that type of fully loving covenant, where I not only am I committed to God, but I adore God and I delight in the Lord, in order for that to happen, I need to trust in God's goodness, and that's why the work that Greg is putting in here to say, who's behind all of this is so important, because my whole allegiance, my delight in the Lord, my love of the Lord, all hinges on whether or not I can trust the Lord's goodness. And that's not really a nugget in terms of like life application, but it's a nugget hopefully to keep people motivated to wrestle with these things and to go through what Greg is saying carefully and think carefully about it, because I think it matters at that level. And that is my nugget.
I love it, Dan. It's a great nugget. And again, our nuggets tie nicely together. Earlier, I talked about how one of the things I feel like I've encountered the most in my the various roles I've had as a staff member of church, and just even in my walk with the Lord and talking with other people, is hurts, traumas, situations that people have attributed to God, and their feeling that they need to forgive God, or they misunderstand God, or they don't trust God because of these awful things that have happened that they have attributed to Him. And I think that's very common, but it also makes me very sad. And the way I kind of like think about it is, like if you've ever gotten a call like from your bank or from your credit card or whatever, and there's a charge there that seems suspicious, that's maybe out of character, and so they want to know, did you really do this? I feel like so many times we are crediting God with this transaction that He had nothing to do with. It was actually the enemy, because again, the enemy is the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He comes to divide and conquer. And so let us not, anything that's happening in our life, let us not credit God for something that He had nothing to do with. Now, are there consequences for our behavior and actions? Yeah, most times there are. But again, I don't think we can like credit God with that and say, look what God did to me. When I was younger, there was an older gentleman who was struggling with a particular lung disease because of a particular life that he had lived and a certain vice that he had had, from a young age. And I remember him, praying that God would quit punishing him with this disease. And it's like, no, bud, God isn't punishing you. Like it's the thing of evil, coming in on itself, imploding on itself. There are consequences for some of the things that we do. So anyway, I guess my nugget is to just encourage people to, whenever we are faced with situations in our life that we could be deceived into thinking, oh, God is doing this. No, this an enemy has done. Like this is not something that we need to be crediting God for, that He had nothing to do with. And I think that is so very important. And I'm going to sound like a broken record because it's just the way it is, but it all goes back to picture of God. There are certain things that we can just know that we know about the character and compassion and love of God. And so let's not attribute things to Him that are nothing to do with him. And let's not play into the enemy's games in that respect. There are certain things that my children know about me, and they know that I would never do certain things to them, say certain things to them, even couched in, oh, because I love you. They just know that because they know my character. They know how I love them. They know their place in my life. And I think it's important for us to do the same, which is why I love that Greg reminded us of our identity and those worksheets that we have. And I think it's listed online, which is really great too. It's just important to know who you are, your identity in Christ, and who God is, and make sure that we are attributing the right characteristics to him, and know that the evil that is happening in the world is not God in a temper tantrum. That is the enemy just having a heyday, but he will not have the last word. So
That's right.
that's my nugget.
Yeah, that's great. I love that comment about what your kids know about you, and that's how they know if something's wrong. If all of a sudden you start acting differently, there's something wrong. I mean, medical reaction or something, and so too, that's how we should be with God. If like you said, our picture of God is anchored in Christ. Well, we know that all of these unchrist-like behaviors, that's not God. There's something wrong here with what's going on here, and there's something suspicious going on, and so I thought that was just really well said.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, Dan, I am really looking forward to the next sermon in the Wrath of the Lamb series. I think it's going to be good. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
All right.
And we'll be here. How about that? We'll be back here next Tuesday.
Right.
We'll talk all about it. We'll talk all about that next sermon
Sounds
that's
good.
coming up. I think it's going to be good.
You're more confident than I am, but
yeah,
we'll
see. It's going to be good, sir. All right, you guys, questions, comments, send them into, there you go, MuseCast@whchurch.org. We'll see you at 4 p.m. in the chat. Have a great week, everyone.